Hi guys, I'm Christoff. I'm a tech instructor here at Manta Dive in Gili Trawangan, Indonesia. And today I've been asked by Diving Week to tell you guys a little bit about my story and answer some questions. So we're going to go ahead and roll with that and see how we go.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for being with us today. Can you tell us a little bit more about your first experience diving?
Alright, so I was kind of talked into it. I was doing my bachelor's degree in Italy, and a good friend from home came to visit for my birthday, and then we went down to Egypt for a week, and she's a very avid diver and very excited about the diving. And it took quite a lot of convincing, actually, because I was a bit, I guess, skeptical at first, and then did a try dive, and then they tried to get me to do my open water, and actually was a bit resistant. Ended up doing a few more try dives, and then actually later that summer, I mean, I knew I loved it from the start, but I decided to do it later that summer in Florida visiting relatives.
What is diving for you in the moment?
At the moment, basically I teach technical diving, so that'd be, there's a few different definitions, I guess, of what that is, but a simple way of looking at it is soft and hard overhead diving, so anything that's cave or wreck or decompression. I think more of a definition maybe I favor is that it's a dive that's a bit more complex and requires some more tools as far as diving knowledge and equipment goes. So that takes more of a, rather than you have a goal in diving, like maybe you're an avid wreck diver, but then all of a sudden there's a wreck you're really interested in that is a little bit deeper, or you want to go inside of a wreck because there's something that's interesting, or inside of a cave, and then you work your way towards learning the toolbox for that specific type of diving, and I guess that's where back in the day people went, oh well, you know, we need to separate that from recreational, because in a sense, I mean, recreational means doing it for fun, and that is, I teach it, so for me it's also a job, but the people I teach are here doing it for fun. So in a way, technical is a part of recreational diving.
Would you recommend to anyone to start diving, and why would you do that?
I would definitely recommend for people to try it. I mean, if you like the ocean and you like being in the water, it has a massive appeal, I would say. I mean, I wouldn't make the statement that it's not for everyone, though obviously, as a dive professional, there are things that exclude people from diving, like medical conditions and so on. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as your first way to access the ocean. I would probably say, you know, for somebody who might not be that confident of a swimmer or hasn't done any snorkeling or spent any time in the water, it would probably be worth exploring a bit of that first before taking the step into scuba diving. But other than that, yeah, I mean, anybody who likes animals, nature, kind of has a bit of an adventure feel to them, I think could definitely like the sport.
Can you share with us any stories that stand out from your diving experience?
Oh wow. Well, I mean, I would say it took me I remember very clearly from the start that I was very keen on seeing a shark. Like, I got fascinated with the marine life early, and I was in places where they had them. I just hadn't gotten lucky. And then I think it was about my 57th or 58th dive after I arrived on Gili Trawangan. I think it was my first trip here. I got a chance to see my first shark, and that meant a lot. You know, it was quite a special moment seeing that shark, and they always fascinated me. The movement, the size of them, the fact that they're apex predators. So that was always very cool for me. So that was definitely a moment that stood out. And then I would also say, like, taking the step a year later from being on the fun diving side of it and going into being a dive master and actually getting a chance for the first time to participate in teaching. So I'd done a little bit of teaching before, and I knew I enjoyed it, but it took on a different form now that I was teaching something that I enjoyed so much. It was the first time I got a chance to, I think, in a structured way teach them, and you know, certified way teach somebody my hobby. Then I very well remember my first liveaboard experience in Komodo. And I would say also, I would also kind of call that my first adventure to a more, not high-end diving, but quality diving destination. So more remote, but it got pretty clear the second you got underwater why, with the abundance of marine life, the quality of the reef, how cool the sights were. Then taking the step into tech was a big one for me as well. Though it was a pretty exciting time, as well as cave. So these moments come along. I mean, there's the passion is always there, but there are definitely times or experiences throughout the year that stand out and that you remember, and especially the people you experience them with, you share them with. So,
your favorite place to dive so far?
Like, the caves in Florida were amazing. Like, that's one of the first places that came to mind. The wrecks in Truck Lagoon were amazing. The reefs and the current dives that we did in Komodo were quite amazing. The deep dives that we've done around here. So when I did I did a few sub 100-meter dives, quite a few sub 100-meter dives with a buddy of mine here on a section of wall attached to a wall that we'd already been diving, but that particular section we found a new drop point on. So I don't think I could choose between one of them. It's been there are too many. It would devalue the others to say that one was number one.
Which is your favorite marine life?
I would say, I mean, if I was going to go for a specific thing I've seen, I would say thresher sharks, just for the way they move in the water and how they look. Though they are quite shy. As far as interactions, I've found that at least around here, the giant trevally. When I was in Komodo, they are more aggressive than the sharks when it came to attacking the schools of fish. And then here, quite often, if I've been out scootering or rebreather diving, I'll find that one of them have been following me for a while. Like, I'll turn around and all of a sudden there'll be one right behind me. They usually don't stick around too long after they realize that you notice them. And then, of course, it got even better. It was already kind of a favorite, but then when Blue Planet 2 came out and I found out that they were taking out birds, that's pretty amazing as well. So, I mean, it's kind of a full adrenaline fish, and they can get pretty big. I've seen some pretty massive ones around here. So I'd say that's one of my favorites to dive with. And then rays as well, eagle rays. Especially the spotted eagle ray. That's one of my favorites.
Okay, a lot of the people that will be watching will be looking for some kind of a piece of advice, for their diving vacations. What would you recommend anybody going, especially for their first diving vacation somewhere?
Well, I would think if it's your first trip for diving, and if your first trip and you want to try diving, I mean, go to a place that's well known for good training. All right, so quite often, like there are a few training centers around the world. I mean, in Asia, Koh Tao and Gili Trawangan, well, the Gilis actually in general in Bali are quite well known. I know Utila, Honduras. But also the Bahamas. I mean, there's plenty of amazing places you can do tri dives. Maybe for somebody who's going for their first time, it might be an idea to go to a place that has other activities as well. Because if you choose some of the more remote and maybe best diving destinations in the world, they are so good because of maybe stronger currents or other things that might not make the diving so appropriate for people who are just starting out. Or even though they have diving that's appropriate for people just starting out, you're not necessarily going to see what you've seen in the photos and videos, because the best of the diving there is pretty complex. So, I mean, there's loads of different places. I'd say it's probably pretty hard to go on a tropical holiday and not run into a place. But I don't want to discount local dive clubs as well, because I have to say, especially going to diving fairs and meeting people in the industry, I mean, some of the people who are the most dedicated, I feel like, are local instructors in Europe, the US, Russia, all over the place, where they might be a very, very long distance from anything that's considered great diving, but they still hold on to their passion, and they still run a little club and go on diving excursions together. So I wouldn't discount looking into something local either, because it's in general it's a community, and tapping into the local diving community is pretty amazing too. So I think it's pretty easy if it's something you want to do. It's not hard to find.
Okay. Well, how would you imagine your perfect week of diving if you can choose from anything?
Oh boy. Well, I guess since it's the end of a workday, it would be being a customer is quite nice. That's a good start. So not having to not doing too much gas filling or organizing equipment for others. But I think I mean a perfect week of diving would probably involve some medium to complex dives with a rebreather, out exploring with some friends. Back to I'd probably rather take the risk of jumping into a place nobody's jumped into before and not seeing anything than going to something established. And then it's more about the adventure and the people that you're there with, and just being in the ocean. And yeah.
All right. One last question from our general ones. How do you see the diving world evolve in the future?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I've read quite a lot about trends through the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s as far as the history. There's and also there's updates from Divers Alert Network and other things, and there are different trends. There's one of the trends is that obviously the people, when diving really kicked off as a sport, so there's an aging part of the diving population as well, because when diving really became a big thing, that group of people are now coming up in age a little bit. But I feel like the fuel has been added on from below. So there's that was one of the things I thought was quite cool. Is in diving you tend to meet people from all walks of life. It could be any profession. It could be any kind of background. I don't think there's not it's not just one particular type, and it's not so expensive. I think that it's for necessarily that select income class. It's for an equipment intensive sport. It's fairly accessible. We've seen a rising trend. It looks like technical diving is improving in Asia at the moment. More diving destinations are opening up in general, and then more are opening up for technical diving, which for me is really cool. I've heard mixed things from other parts of the world, but since I haven't been there myself to confirm them, I don't want to make any. I don't want to make any statements about an area that I don't know about specifically. I think it's all of us that are in the industry, whether it's an instructor or an equipment manufacturer or an agency, wants to improve the diver experience, improve the safety, and get more people to stay in the sport. So I think overall you've seen a steady improvement as far as gear is concerned. It gets better, it gets more comfortable, it gets easier to use, it gets more advanced, especially with the diving computers. If we look at training, materials get updated, newer research gets put in, and of course new styles. There's a lot more online now, and so I guess in that sense, like a lot of the materials have moved from paperback to online, and I think the next step is the move from plastic certification cards. Even though I would hope that an open water card, I still have all of mine, so they've not ended up anywhere where we don't want them. But yeah, if we can use less plastic, that is great. So there's a move to digital there. Of course, there are limits to technology. We can't wirelessly transfer gas. I don't think we ever will be necessarily. So we're still going to be using first stages, second stages, and hoses to breathe underwater. But yeah, those are kind of maybe the few things that I've observed. There's a big push for conservation, which is good. I think more, if you look at videos and you read books about diving in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't maybe that conservation wasn't important, and I just think we didn't know yet. People didn't know, maybe hadn't been diving long enough to see a change, and also didn't have education as good on not feeding marine life and so on. So a lot of good practices, I think, are coming into place there. So we're seeing a decline in areas of touching marine life or disturbing marine life, and right now even though I know the trash problem is huge, there's a lot of work that's being done by a lot of people, including manufacturers, agencies, and dive shops around the world to improve the situation. So hopefully, it's a massive issue, trying to keep the oceans healthy. And it's not just on divers to do it, but I think it's definitely a community that cares very much about it, and everybody's doing the little bit that they can in their way, and that's one of the positive movements within it. So no matter what your views are on other things, most divers can agree on the fact that we'd like there to be more efficiency and more sharks and more cool things to look at.
Can you tell us a little bit more, how did you get into the tech diving, and what brought Phil from the Western world to the Eastern world, or like a little bit more about this part of your story?
I've always traveled since I was a little kid, because I grew up in Sweden, but my mother was from the U.S. and my father's from Bulgaria. So obviously just simply visiting family meant, sometimes traveling a few thousand miles, not more. And then because neither of my parents were very good at handling the Swedish winters, including myself, we generally do a winter holiday somewhere. So I made it to Asia. I think Thailand was the first place we went. I now kind of look back on all the trips I did to warm water destinations, regretting that I didn't already dive back then. But we all have to start at some point. Then Asia's kind of an easy place to get to, an easy place to travel. Especially from Europe where I was living, so it became a logical kind of destination for me, and I loved it, and had a great time. So then eventually when I found Gili Chong, and I kind of found my spot and stuck around.
And then how did you get into tech diving, from recreational to tech diving?
Well, I loved recreational, but it was one of those things where the recreational limits kind of started getting a little bit in the way of what I wanted to do. So me and a buddy were looking at a few dive sites, and it kind of annoyed us that there were parts of the dive sites we couldn't access and go to because we didn't have enough gas with us, or we didn't have enough bottom time. So I started asking around about what the option was. And this might still exist in some places, but misconceptions back then. Some people told me, "Oh no, decompression diving is just for crazy people who want to go really deep, and it's going to break your bank account. So don't even bother." And that usually, when somebody speaks with those kind of generalizations, I ignore it. So I actually went and spoke to a tech instructor and found out what it was all about. And in the beginning, it's more just about being able to spend more time at a given depth, and the equipment intensity builds up slowly. I'm not going to say that being a fully set up rebreather diver to do, say, a 100-meter dive is in any way not expensive. Like, there's a lot of gear that goes into that. But to be able to do a dive at 30, 40, 45 meters and be able to get a decent bottom time out of it, it matches up pretty well with the other training that I did. So after those misconceptions were kind of put to rest, I was pretty quick to sign up for a course, and then I felt like there was a new big bump in the development of my diving. So there was and that really made it interesting. Like I liked learning more on the theoretical side, and I liked doing more stuff underwater. And technical diving is very problem solving focused, and I enjoyed that. So there were a lot of things about it that appealed to me.
All right. We've heard that you've discovered so many new dive sites actually around.
I don't know how many. It's not so many. It's not that many. But so sometimes I worry about the idea of a new dive site. Yes, if it's not established, and as far as we know, nobody's been down there and had a look around, fair enough. It could definitely be categorized as a new dive site. Now you're always going to be limited in an area like this by how far you can get with a boat, Obviously, it starts. You can't just motor out to sea unless there's some kind of seamount or somewhere it comes up shallow. The Lombok Strait and the areas out here, it gets pretty deep. But yeah, we started poking around because we got the feeling that there was more to see. And on the tech side, it's a little bit harder than the recreational. The recreational dive sites, if you look at the dive site map, are mostly around the islands. And then we found a few for maybe say advanced to dive master level sites, and then of course on the technical side I guess we've close to doubled the amount of diveable sites that were around the island. But it's not exploration I would necessarily take credit for, because technical diving has a long tradition on Gili T for about the last 20 years. So there's definitely a chance that somebody popped their head down there before, but maybe wasn't able to get a GPS drop on it, which for some of the deeper sites we have to. And we picked up a sonar, or it was more a sonar. It was a GPS and fish finder, basically. I think it was meant for lake fishing, but whatever you can afford that works at the time. And it was enough for us to kind of get an idea where we would just go out and look for depths that were diveable, and then depth changes. So not just flat bottom, but some kind of topography, either ridges or bommies or hills. Of course, you're always hoping that it would be amazing if you just happened to stumble over a wreck, but so far we haven't been that lucky. The only new wrecks I've been diving are the ones we helped sink, so it's been more artificial reef. But you never know. One day there's still boats out there that haven't been found. So
that's awesome. Oh, tell us a little bit more about the whole process. To be honest, I have absolutely no clue how it starts. Like, do you do any kind of research? How do you choose where to go? How do you plan it?
We've been pretty casual about it. It'd be something like, well, that looks shallow enough to dive. Has anybody been out there? And like, oh no. Or maybe what we have a few sea mounds where the shallows unfortunately been damaged by dynamite fishing. But then the question was, has anybody been to 45 meters there? And then you started having a look around, because you start. We're near a pretty large mountainous island, and then we're diving these kind of walls and ridges underwater, and then you imagine that if you look at a map and you look at where the places we're diving are, you imagine that, well, yeah, there's got to be some more to this. There's got to be a few more spots. Now, as I said, the ones that are encircling the island have obviously been covered. I would say everything around the island at a given depth has been covered. It doesn't drop too deep right off the beach. But these seamounds, these areas, we go out and we'd have a look, and occasionally we'll find something that's actually worth going to. I think what we've really been looking for is a place with a very, very nice steep drop. So where we can get, we would like a place where it goes from shallow to deep very, very quickly. We tend to see more marine life in areas like that, where you get currents, but not currents that make the dives too risky. So it's a factor that there's a lot of factors to consider if you find a new place. Is it good enough to like take somebody there who's come here for diving? What kind of levels can dive the site? Is the marine life all right, and are the conditions safe? So there's also there's the pre-process, which I think we just sit around and go, well, we'd like to go check that out, and then we go do it. And then after that, there's a few more dives to just make sure that we have a good idea of what the site looks like. As far as mapping and that kind of stuff goes, what I found the easiest, we use underwater scooters, and then I use a mask-mounted paralens camera, and then I'll scooter 5-10 meters off the bottom, and then that's the easiest way for me, because then I can just go back and go through my video and draw what I see in the video, because trying to draw from memory isn't always so easy, and if you're drawing underwater, you need a big slate, and then it's kind of that's where I've had the best success so far, at least with dive maps.
Sounds great. Well, a little bit of a girly question, but do you get to name the new sites that you find?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess. Yeah, Yeah, we do, in a sense. But it depends on, because sometimes finding a new dive site might be going to the locals and asking if, because, I mean, a classic way to find fish is to ask fishermen. So quite often the fishermen already have a name for it. And we definitely don't want to change that, because we just think, we like that, because that adds to the history of it. So if the area already has a name, then we'll name it after that. If there's something very specific underwater, like one of the wall sections that we got a new GPS drop on called, we called it Tangga, which in Indonesian means ladder, just because the wall has this, it's very steep compared to some of the other walls, and then it has very distinct ledges. And then we had one we called pyramid, because it has it's basically kind of three ridges coming out of one shallow point, so it had more of a pyramid shape. So sometimes it's just as simple as that. But I guess at some point I'll have to name a dive site after a buddy or something like that. We'll see.
Sounds great. What's the feeling of discovering a new site?
Well, you get really excited. I mean, it's fun. It's just fun to be down diving. But I guess there's an excitement in being down there, well, scootering along, and you're not seeing anything, and then all of a sudden something pops up, and you go, oh, well, this could be interesting. And then it might be just a small section of reef, nothing worth going back to, or all of a sudden, you found something that's definitely worth staying on and exploring, and then there's the whole excitement of going back and checking out more of the area. So yeah, it's a rush for sure, and I mean we know there's a lot of variety in marine life. That's another thing, being in the Coral Triangle, being in Indonesia. I mean, there are molas and threshers and mantas within established dive sites with cleaning stations not too far from here. There are dive sites with hammerheads not too far from here. So, I mean, it is something that you're thinking about when you're doing this. Like, they probably venture past our area. The question is, where are they swimming? Is there somewhere around here? Is there a manta cleaning station somewhere closer than going for a few days? So, I mean, I would definitely say that's in the back of the mind.
So what's next for you, Phil?
Well, actually, I'm wrapping up a course now. Then I'm heading to the Philippines. It's just at the end of March, so it'll be the course will start April 2nd or 3rd, I guess. I'll be doing my instructor trainer workshop at TDI, which is something I've been looking forward to for a long time, and I finally decided it was time to take the step. And then later in May, I'll be heading back to Sweden to visit some family, and we'll see. I've really been hoping to get to do some diving back home and get into some cold water stuff, but we'll see if I have the chance to do that.
Any message you would like to leave to the audience?
Ooh. Well, if you haven't tried diving yet, I definitely recommend doing it. And if technical diving is something you're interested in, then I would definitely say look into it. And I'm always happy to answer questions. I know you guys are too. But yeah, that, and we're in a bit of a critical time now as far as keeping the oceans healthy, and that's a massive understatement. Like there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I think for all of us, it's conservation at the moment is big, and then so whether it is if you're already studying marine biology, you're probably already thinking about it. But for other people out there, they're in other walks of life, like there's always something you can do to help, and any smart solutions to lessen our impact on the oceans, for sure.